this image that you've seen so far is something that after thinking about the move to S4 would have seen multiple times over. And they're constantly debating whether there should be a system conversion, a new implementation, or a landscape transformation. Going by the rule of elimination, landscape transformation is more for customers who have multiple SAP, non-SAP systems, and they're going to build a new S4 instance by carving out data and configuration from any of these, one or more of these systems. With respect to new implementation, that's fairly simple. So these are net new customers who are going to get into S4. So they put in the new configuration, get in the data from their legacy systems, and go through a greenfield implementation process. And the third one is the system conversion. So this is typically for ECC customers who have been using the ECC system, and they want to convert both their data and configuration into S4. It sounds pretty simple, but then why do we hear so much about the system conversion as compared to the other two? From our experience so far, we find this is possibly because of these three reasons. One, the system conversion is not like an EHP upgrade that ECC customers have done in the past. Number two, you're changing the operating system, you're changing the database, and also the application from ECC to S4. And number three, the system conversion process is more complex because the data has to be migrated from the ECC data structure to the S4 data structure. And this process has to be done so methodically because in the event of any inconsistency in the ECC data, then the data migration does not happen right. So that is one of the biggest reasons that the S4 conversion process is more complex than the other two. Over the next 40 to 45 minutes, what we will typically do is go through the entire conversion process of how ECC gets converted to an S4. This is SAP's transition to SAP S4HANA roadmap. So what we're going to discuss is what are the phases in an SAP S4 conversion, and what are the different work streams that you have. So this is typically a matrix between the work streams on the y-axis and the phases on the x-axis. Then each cell within each of in this matrix will represent an activity that has to be done in the project as part of a certain work stream within a particular project phase. Why the work stream is important is because this primarily tells you the kind of resources who are going to play a part in this whole process. If we can effectively put the entire list of conversion tasks into the right cell in the matrix, then the conversion is already well begun. So this is the first step for us to understand what are all the tasks that are available, that have to be executed, and also when it should be executed and by whom. Primarily, the work streams that you see up here are the project management tasks, the solution adoption, the design and configuration, the analytics, the custom code adaptation, testing, integration with third-party systems, system and data migration, meaning the system, the new hardware, the operating system, database, and then the migration of the data, and then the technical architecture and infrastructure, where you would have to decide on the deployment options, whether you're going to buy the hardware, keep it on premise, or you're going to put it in a data center with remote infrastructure management, or possibly use cloud providers for the same. And then you transition to operations. Going a little deeper into these work streams, the project management, primarily all the project and quality management tasks, the organizational change management, and the enablement of the project team themselves. So the project team of the customer's location. And then the solution adoption. Here is where you create the training strategy, the learning paths, and the enablement of the end users to be ready to use the converted S4 system. Under design and configuration, the typical activities include the identification and design of the functional changes based on multiple fit gap workshops that you run with the IT and the business. And this becomes critical because it's based on this, the solution adoption has to happen. And then analytics. Analytics, any customer would currently be reporting data from ECC and possibly other systems. But with S4, you have the embedded analytics feature. So you should go relook all your reporting methodologies and see if those reports can be done from S4 directly. With respect to custom code, over the years, we would have developed custom code on ECC in ABAP. And now a lot of change might have to happen on the ECC custom code to make it adaptable to S4HANA and also to the HANA database. I would go into a lot more detail on how this custom code adaptation is done and the tools that go with that. And then on the technical architecture and the infrastructure. Early on in the project, we'll have to understand what are our deployment options and what the sizing and where we deploy and how we're going to manage the whole thing. With respect to testing, this covers the identification of the test cases, the test scenarios, the planning, and the execution as well. So the tests could include smoke tests, integration tests, regression tests, user acceptance tests, and performance tests. So if you look at it, each of these tests are run by a different set of people, and the exit criteria for each of these would be very different. So, but all these will have to be plugged into the right time in the project after each system conversion, so that we can progress to the final conversion of the production system with a lot more confidence. From our most recent experience, we suggest that you run extensive performance tests on the production hardware with full load, including the final hardware setup. Like in your final production system, you would have replication. And once you go live, you would have a lot of data that has to sync up with the other reporting systems. So unless you run an end-to-end test of your business transactions with all the right kind of scenario, you would be caught unaware about the performance bottlenecks that you might face. And then with respect to the integration workstream, this primarily is how you integrate the converted S4 environment into your third-party systems. This could also include the SAP Cloud Platform if you intend to develop more applications on SAP. And then the system and data migration. This primarily is how you set up each of your S4 landscape systems, the dev, QA, prod, how you take copies from the production, and how you execute your S4 conversion on each of these systems and iterate into the final set of activities that you would do in production in a specified window. And when this is done multiple times, then when you run your production system, it goes smooth and it fits perfectly into the planned downtime window. What we've seen is the multiple iterations is really important. And then when you build your development system and your QA system, it is recommended that you wipe out, freeze all your development, take out all the open developments so you can look at them later, and overwrite your development system with copies of production. Why you would do this? Primarily, it helps you in two ways. Once you've gone live, your development and QA system are very close to your production system. So your support becomes a lot easier. And the second reason is each time you do a mock run, you're running the mock run on a copy of production. And then when you finally do your production run, the only difference that you see in production is the change in the in the transaction data that has happened in between. So this gives you a very good way of doing the conversion, so you don't hit against any unknown errors in the last phase. And the transition to operations. Why that's important is now, possibly if you're not on Suite on HANA, then you would have to train your IT operations and the support team to be able to handle the HANA database itself. And then you will have to make sure you have the right tools to support this. Having talked about each of the work streams, let us quickly touch upon the various phases in a S4 conversion project. Time-wise, if you look at the SAP S4HANA roadmap, it's structured into the discover, prepare, explore, realize, deploy, and run phases. So what happens in each of these phases? So the next couple of slides, I'll go over what is done in each of these phases and what are the technical activities that are done, and possibly the tools, the most important, most sought after tools to be able to do those phases successfully. Because you're talking about some tools which are given by SAP, some which are given by the partner, and then you would still have your homegrown tools possibly to help you in the testing processes. So first, the discover phase. This is more like an assessment phase. And why would you do this? This is primarily to build a business case and get an approval to actually start the S4 conversion. This phase helps you evaluate the complexity of the conversion and also the feasibility. So let's just quickly move on to the discovery and the assessment phases. So how is this accomplished? Primarily, you'll need to have workshops. As service providers, we have workshops with the customer, both functional, technical, and infra workshops. And then we strategize on a number of things. How is the landscape going to be during the project and after the project? Where are you going to deploy your S4 landscape? How are you going to manage the dual development? How is HA and DR addressed? How are we going to, what is the cutover strategy? How do you go about doing the integration with your third-party interfaces? How is the testing done? What are the testing? What are the test cases? What are the test scenarios? And then archiving. Is there a need for archiving now? Is there a possibility to clean up your database ahead of the S4 conversion? Or if that is not required, then how do you plan to keep your S4 system not grow too much after you've converted to S4? And then the training strategy, which is both training for the IT users as well as for the end users. So when we do these kinds of workshop, at the end of a discover phase, these are the possible deliverables that you should expect. One is you should know if your system is how it's going to be compatible when you run on an S4. What is the business process impact? What are the fit gap? The fit gap analysis document, which tells you what is your current process here in ECC as against what is in S4, and then what are the business functions that you're currently using, and what are the add-ons? Are they still compatible when you go to S4? And how are you going to go about and review the errors and inconsistencies in a pre-check? So if you already had a list of these errors and inconsistencies, then you're already crossed the bridge partway. So then you know how you're going to handle them when you actually run the project. And then the review of the simplification list. I will go through a little further detail on the simplification list, as well as the add-ons and the business functions, because those are the most critical things when you do the assessment phase. And then some housekeeping advisory. How are you going to clean up your code? How are you going to clean up the tables like logs, like iDocs that you don't need, iDoc logs that you don't need anymore? So it's unspool logs, the batch logs, because even though all of this has jobs that do the cleanup, you'd really want to relook all this, because when you enter into a conversion, the size of the database really matters. One, for the size of the hardware that you're going to procure, and two, how you go about to simplify your conversion process. And number three, how are you going to manage this going forward? And then some considerations on the landscape and infrastructure, which we already touched upon. And then the actual project considerations. What is your project plan? How are you going to do the testing, the cutover, and so on? So if you had all this at the end of the assessment phase, then you are at a very good shape to be able to take it to your board or your management to be able to get an approval to start the project. And by this time, the IT team and the SMEs already have a fair idea on what they are getting into. So there are some activities that we recommend that which you would do in a later phase has been pulled into the discover phase. The reason being, we have understood and we've realized that if we had addressed these early on, then it would have really helped us do the project better. So what are the tools that are available to be able to do these? The maintenance planner is one. The SAP readiness check is one. The SAP transformation navigator is another. SAP Fiori apps recommendation. In addition to this, there are a lot of tools that have been developed by partners. In fact, we have one such tool that we have developed at Car Technologies that helps you do this assessment in a very short period of time and be able to deliver to you an assessment report at the end of this exercise. The tool is KTern, and I will talk about KTern a couple of slides down the line. So these partner tools, it really helps because especially when the partner has done the conversion himself, he knows how he can accelerate the whole process. So and running these pre-checks in this phase helps us in addressing the inconsistencies well ahead of time. So let's first discuss about the maintenance planner. This is nothing new to those ECC customers. It's now hosted on SAP portal. It simplifies the landscape maintenance process. So whenever you'll have to do an install or an upgrade, you always reach out to the maintenance planner. And now the maintenance planner available on the SAP portal, you have options where you say, okay, this is a conversion. I'm going from ECC, EHP, XX to wherever, to the S4HANA 1709 system. And then you give your system details. It takes in all that information and it comes back to you to tell you what is feasible, what is not. And it also gives you the prerequisite with respect to the OSDB versions, if you had any add-ons that you'll have to look at and so on. So running the maintenance planner way ahead really helps you in this process. The second one is the readiness check. So readiness check, earlier it used to, you had to run the readiness check with SAP Solution Manager, but now SAP gives you an option where you could run the readiness check without using the Solution Manager as well. So what are the areas that the readiness check provides? First is it gives you the sizing. The sizing becomes very critical because it is at this assessment phase that you're already looking at how big should my target system be. And we've read and heard over and over again that the size of your target system is going to be considerably less. But in reality, it is not 1/10, possibly 2/3, or somewhere between 2/3 and a full is the kind of reduction that you see in the database. And during this conversion process itself, a lot of memory and CPU gets used. So you'd have heard about the sizing report that we generally run. The readiness check really runs the sizing reports and gives you indication on how big your appliance should be during the conversion, post-conversion, and so on. And then what about the add-ons? Many customers would have add-ons. These could be standard add-ons of ECC, and SAP would have made sure that it is compatible with S4. But then there could be add-ons in your system which have been developed by SAP custom development. And for those, it is suggested that you reach out to SAP CD ahead of time to ensure that these are compatible with S4. And the third, the most critical one, is the partner add-ons. So what are these partner add-ons? You would have bought partner add-ons that have been certified by SAP that could be installed into SAP, and you've been using them. But now when you go to S4, you'll have to ensure that the same add-on works on S4. So if you have a third-party add-on, our suggestion is soon after the assessment phase, get in touch with the third-party vendor, ensure that he understands that there are changes that could be required in the software. So if he is not yet released S4 compatible add-on, then possibly he could get started on the development sooner than later. And the the vendor will have to create an add-on compatible with every release of S4. So that is very critical. So possibly with 1709 and the next release coming up, you'll have to ensure that the vendor knows which version of S4 that you're getting into. And then about the active business functions. There are these active business functions that will have to be supported in S4. So they could be in one of these states. They could be always on in S4, customer switchable, or they could be always off. You would have to be worried if your business function is always off, because in that case, the S4 on-premise does not support that. So possibly at that point, you would not be able to do a conversion to S4. And the third one is, what are the solution adjustments required? So why would that be required? Because now you have a new data structure on S4 as against ECC. So your solution will have to work on the S4 database as well. So these are the various areas that the readiness report reports on. So once you have this information, you are able to go ahead and step into the conversion process. And at the end of a discover phase, you also have the project plan, and you have the commercial, you have the timeline, you have the the business resources that need to be part of the project. You have the testing scenarios, you have the testing resources, you have the exit criteria, you have the strategies. So pretty much at the end of the discover or the assessment phase, you're good to go to embark on this project. This, given the importance of this, we recommend that you take a copy of your production into a sandbox system and run the pre-checks, which is typically not done. But the reason we recommend that you do this is because you can run all the pre-checks that lead into a conversion. When you do this, what really happens is you already have the list of all inconsistencies, and then you know how much of involvement of the business that you need. So this kind of gives you an overview of the tools that we use. And KTern is a tool that we have that can work you through the assessment phase and give you a final report on how a S4 conversion project is going to go. And then you move on to the prepared and the realize phases. This is primarily the crux of the entire conversion. So between these two phases, you have developed an L2 plan, and then you have all the strategies finalized, and then you have a detailed design of the SAP solution. You have your fit gap workshops done, and then you do the custom code analysis. A little later, I'll tell you why a custom code analysis is required, and then you'd be able to understand the value of starting this early on. And then you start converting each of your systems on copies of production. And then in the realize phase, you do the conversion of the dev, QAs, and multiple mock runs as required. So custom code is adjusted for SAP S4HANA in dev. Typically, it is fixed in dev and then tested in the QAs. And then you could use the same transports to be moved into the mock instances. But there are customers who prefer to do it in the sandbox, and then you can use those to move it into development and possibly change the ownership on those objects. This actually helped save us a considerable effort when we executed this conversion for one of the high-tech industries in Ohio recently. Finally, end-user testing, that's also part of the realize phase, and then you step into the deploy phase. And in the deploy is the actual go live, and then the run phase, which talks about how you go about to continue operations. For the purpose of this discussion, I limit myself to the prepared and the realize phase, because this is really the crux of the complete conversion. So this again, so between the prepared and the realize phase, so we already talked about the maintenance planner because we suggested that you run it a little sooner. And with respect to the system requirements, only a couple of requirements. One is you'll have to be a Unicode system, and the second one is you cannot have a dual stack anymore. So it'll have to be a single ABAP stack. And with respect to the pre-checks, so what the many pre-checks that are done both on the finance and the logistics side to make sure, and the custom code to make sure that you're ready to convert to S4. So let's delve a little deeper on the custom code preparation, custom code checks. So why do we really need these custom code checks? Traditionally, all along, we've been building a lot of extra code on ECC on the ABAP. And it really helped us because we could put things that were not available in S4, we could build it the way we wanted. The approach was good so far. But then the only downside comes when you have to do the conversion now, because the underlying data structure on an ECC against what is on S4 is very different. But SAP has taken care to ensure that they keep this change minimal. So they have taken measures where they provide you things like CDS at the data to ensure that these data model changes make that you have to make on your ABAP code is much lesser. But in spite of it, there would be about a 20 to 30% remediation that will have to be done on the ABAP code. So if that is not done, your existing custom code would not work. So where are all these areas that could get affected? Possibly in the material number field, the pricing, the key tables like BKPF, BSEG, MKP, MSEG tables, and so on, where you've already used all this in your custom code. But then when you'll have to say adapt so much of ABAP code, then it is only prudent that you first clean up your custom code. All of us know by experience that we would have developed so much code, but we're not using as much. So finally, what gets used in production is only a fraction of what really gets developed and moved to production. Therefore, we recommend you to monitor your system landscape for a longer period of time to do some housekeeping. And this can be accomplished by a couple of tools. One is the UPL, which is also called the Usage Procedure Log, in which you get which custom ABAP code objects are really used in your system can be identified. And why is this important? One is you spend less effort in cleaning up this code. And number two, you can also prioritize your code. So which are the code that that are most used you attack them first. And then you have the SEMON, which collects the usage data on how often a specific ABAP code object gets called. And it also gives you information about the calling business processes. So that really helps. And then you have the SAP Solution Manager's custom code lifecycle management. So which retrieves the usage data, and then it gives you a graphical presentation on how you could use how much of this ABAP code is used, and it helps you prioritize. From our learning experience earlier, we've realized that you should monitor your business processes for a longer period of time, and it should be on production. You'll have to turn on some logs, some switches, key switches, so you start tracking them. So if you're not tracking them, you're not going to know what is being used. And typically, if you can do this at least for a 3-month period, then it really gives you the right statistics. It helps you clean up the custom code a lot better. So what is that you, so once you've cleaned up and you've identified the list of custom objects that you're going to do, so what is that you do? So there are two kinds of checks. One is the SAP HANA check. The other one is the SAP S4HANA checks. The SAP HANA checks is primarily because you moved from a non-HANA database to a HANA database. For those customers that are already on Business Suite on HANA, then this might not be applicable. So why is this required? Because the S4HANA is, again, it's based on the HANA database, and possibly in your native SQL, you could have used the native SQL of the predecessor database. And these database vendor-specific dependencies must be eliminated. So that is why you have these called SAP HANA checks. And another reason is possibly all the select statements that we have written without order by assuming that the data in the database table is already sorted. So these are the things that you should look out for. And there are tools that help you find this information. KTern does get you the code along with the number of places where these fixes will have to be done. And then you have the S4HANA checks. So why do you do those? Those are primarily for, you'll have to compare your existing code with the simplification database and see if a simplification item, something that has been simplified is being called in your ABAP code. So these two become critical, and more than more cases, the effort that goes into cleaning up and adapting this ABAP code is underestimated. So based on the complexity of the ABAP code, so I think as customers, each of you know how complex your ABAP code is. So depending on the complexity and on the assessment report, you might want to start this sooner. So that was the reason I said that if you start this sooner, possibly on the sandbox system, then it really helps you to speed up, to get this done at the right time, because you want to test this along with your other testing scenarios. So it is really critical that this is started well ahead of time for those customers that have extensive ABAP coding. So then we move on into the actual crux of the conversion, which goes like this. So you have the pre-conversion preparation, then you have the pre-conversion configuration, then you have the actual conversion, which is done with the SUM tool, which all of us ECC basis consultants are familiar with. And then you have the pre-data migration, and then you have the data migration, post-data migration, and then data validation. So these are the set of tasks that are done on every system. So the first time you do it on the sandbox, development, QA, and so on, these set of tasks are repeated on every single system. And as you progress, what you would realize is many of these can be recorded in change requests, so you can use them and send them through as transports. And then you would also clean up your production data for the inconsistencies. Thereby, the time that is taken to process through these steps becomes lesser and lesser, and you fit into the downtime window. So this is some of the tasks in the pre-conversion preparation. So this is typically a basis activity where you look at the conversion guide, download the notes, perform the cleansing activities with respect to the logs, the spool requests, and so on, and then get the right versions of the SUM maintenance planner and stuff. And then you get the installation software, and then review one more time, review the readiness check and the maintenance planner. And then when you step into the pre-conversion configuration, this is a little tricky because it involves both the functional and the basis and the ABAP resources to work together here. So with respect to the configuration from the basis and the infra side, you want to make sure you have all your hardware installed and provisioned, all the OSDB parameters set, and have all the application servers based on the sizing report that you received at the assessment. And then you'll have to uninstall the add-ons. Maybe you'll have to uninstall the add-ons if they're not supported, and then reinstall them later on when you get into the S4. Or you might have to have some adaptations. Your vendor might have given you some programs that will help you adapt those add-ons in S4. And then you run the pool and cluster table checks. Those are the 3 jobs. These again are long-running jobs. So we suggest it could even run for days. So we suggest that you start this early on, because what these jobs do is, the first one, the SDBI cluster check, it's used to check the consistency of data from cluster tables. The second one there, it checks the readability of the pool tables. And the third one, it checks the table with DEC fields for invalid BCD numbers. So these are the various checks that are run on the pool and cluster tables. And then you have the new simplification item checklist, which is run inside the using SE38 from that program. So what does that do? It gives you 2 kinds of check. One is the relevance check, the other one is the consistency check. So here it compares with the SAP simplification database. It looks at your relevance of your business process, see how it gets affected. And on the consistency check, during the conversion process, the system will be migrated to the new data structure. So this conversion routines rely on consistent data in the system. And in order for this to happen automatically, all these data should be consistent. So it gives you any output from all that, which you can review and ensure you're not affected, because your process is not affected. And if it is, how you remediate the process. And then there are some finance and logistics related checks that you run. The RAS Fin migration pre-check, which pre-checks for asset accounting, and then the one for logistics, which does the customer value mapping, the vendor value mapping, CVI mapping, contact person mapping, and so on. These are all primarily functional areas. So as against a EHP upgrade, this would be the time where the entire team works together to understand what the errors are, what the inconsistencies are, and fix them before you enter the sum. So if there are going to be any red icons on any of these screens, then you would not be able to start the sum tool. So the sum tool primarily kicks you out at that stage. So not wanting to get there, and this could be started early on. And then as you fix these get captured in transports, and then the fixes can be moved to the other systems. So the further systems are not as complex as the first couple of systems. And then you step into the sum. So this tool is all basis people are familiar with. So it is primarily divided into 2 phases. the uptime and the downtime. So the uptime, the activities that run during the uptime when the system is still accessible. So you can start this even possibly a week or two before the actual downtime starts. So it makes it does all these checks. It installs some components. It creates these structures and creates a shadow instance where it creates all this. And then at one point it says you're ready for your downtime. And you'd want to get to this phase maybe 3 days or 5 days ahead of time. So in case there are some issues, you have time to resolve them. And then the downtime. It's during this downtime, the actual the software is installed and the tables are completed. Some of the tables all the tables get migrated into the S4 database. What we'll have to understand now is once the sum is done, the data migration still moves on. The data migration still has to happen during the downtime. So once the sum is done, then you step into the data migration process. It is at this time in the data migration process, what really happens is all the data that was in ECC has already come into your S4HANA database. And now a number of steps will have to be done to migrate all this data from ECC kind of structures into the S4 structures. And prior to doing that, there are a lot of pre-data migration activities that have to be done. So those I have listed for, and these are both on the finance and the logistics sides. So you'll have to define all these and capture these in transports. And then you go about to run all the jobs that you see below. And then you monitor them, you ensure that every phase gets fixed, completed before you move on to the next one. And as and when issues are fixed, you know what has to be done. There are some issues that happen during data migration where you could fix them after you go live, depending on the complexity. But there are some where it does not allow you to move forward. And some of these are really long running jobs. So this process could even take as much time as your actual SUM downtime. So you'll have to rerun this multiple times to ensure that you get this within the cutover window. And then you have some post-migration activities as well. But then all this is done through ABAP reports from your GUI screen, but you're already on the S4 system. When you do this, there's a lot of data validation that has to be done. Why do you want data validation to be done? Now you know data is moved from your ECC to your S4 structure. So when that happens, you want to make sure all the data has moved. You want to make sure that all the data has moved and that there are no discrepancies in the data, and also that every field value is right and you have not lost data. So to be able to do that, this could be done in a couple of ways. If you're doing it manually, what you do is on the ECC system, you take reports, you take table dumps of all the tables and tables of both master and transaction data. And then when you move to the S4 system, you could rerun those reports, go to SE16, get the data out. But this becomes a very time-consuming process, given that your data could run into billions of records. So what you would want to do is use some tools that can do this automatically, and that you could do them in parallel. So one of the modules of KTern does this automatically, where you are able to get data from both the systems, do a compare, and push out the results. And then all you have to do is go look at the inconsistencies. In a really good scenario, you have all green, every data has been migrated. But I'm sure after a couple of mock runs, you would definitely get to those states. So these are the various data that you would want to validate both in your source and target system. And this is a sample from the logistics. So depending on the use of the customer, you will have to ensure that all the data that you have has got migrated and validated. So once the validation is done, then that kind of and a smoke test, and then you release the system to the users. But then that kind of completes a conversion from ECC to S4. But then what are the key learnings that we have had in our last couple of conversion customers that we would like to bring to the table to go ahead and discuss that that would help other customers to do this in a less cumbersome way. The first one, I cannot stress enough on the discovery or the assessment phase. Like I said earlier, the discovery and the assessment phase, do it well ahead of time, possibly 3 months before you really start your project. Get all the information, get enabled, know what you're getting into, and there are certain tasks from the pre-checks that you run ahead of time. So this is complete a business case, a project L1 project plan, the commercials that would be involved. You can order your hardware, get all of them ready in case you're doing on-premise and stuff like that. And then I cannot stress the importance of stress enough about multiple mock runs. Why are multiple mock runs required? So the first time I said you take a copy of development, put it into the sandbox, do these tasks. Possibly the first conversion could take 3 weeks or maybe 3 to 4 weeks. And then when you do the development, it should take shorter period. And in this period, you're already adapting your custom code. And as you progress from one mock run to other, you're going to have a lot of things that change. One is you're going to get fixes from SAP, you're going to get patches from SAP, you're going to get your own transports that have to be moved. So as you progress through each mock run, you test all these things. And you also test for the delta transactional data that you have in mock run n+1 as against the mock run n. And so when that happens, as you progress and get closer to the production run, it really helps you, because by then you really know what is the exact time to the minute of every task item list, a task item that you're going to execute in your production during your uptime, during your SUM downtime, during the migration, and during data validation. So this is the real effective way, and it doesn't have to be 2, 3. I think it depends on every customer. So depending on the complexity, depending on the size of the database, and depending on the complexity in terms of the number of company codes, the number of entities. So the more mock runs you run, the more comfortable the project team is to touch the production. The third one is the change freeze. So why would you need the change freeze? The change freeze, let's say you have an ECC landscape, dev, QA, prod, and life is going on business as usual. And now you've started an S4 conversion project. So you've taken a copy of production, put it in dev S4. And now let's assume fixes that come in production will have to be done anyways. You cannot stop those. But you don't want any new changes coming into your ECC landscape, because for 2 reasons. One, it might not be applicable in the S4 landscape. And 2, when you have to do it on the S4 landscape, you'll have to manually do it, and you're bringing a change to the whole process. So let's assume you allowed a couple of company codes or a couple of new configuration go into production after you've done development. Now, when you take that copy and do your QA, you're working on a completely different set of parameters. So the earlier on you do the change freeze, you're better off. And if you have done the discovery assessment phase, you're exactly able to pull in some activities earlier, and you can keep your project timeline much smaller. So your change freeze does not happen to be so long. The fourth one is the performance testing. Why is performance testing important? Because once you go live, you're on a new hardware, new database, new application. Users are finding new screens that they're trying to figure out how to run this. So there's so many changes. So if you have not tested your performance end to end, you could potentially have problems and bottlenecks. So when you run your performance test, keep it as close to the production scenario as possible. And then don't underestimate the time taken for ramp down and ramp up activities, because there are multiple parties involved. It's not just the project, the basis, the IT SMEs. There are a lot more parties involved here. So then it becomes all the more critical that everybody works in sync and does the handover seamlessly. And the next one is the reporting data. So you might want to push out data from your S4 to any other data warehousing system. And as soon as you go live, if you start doing this, it's going to bring your system to the knees. So plan ahead on how this is going to be done. And then integration with third-party systems during ramp up. Similar to the EDW, you might have other third-party systems. And because of a couple of days of downtime, you're going to have a lot of data that has to catch up to come to the real time. So ensure that you've planned this ahead and start doing this depending on the priority of the system. Prioritize those. So don't try to open up the system all at the same time. And then have a hotline and a very good connection with your vendors, with both SAP, the infrastructure, and any other software tools that you're using for replication and so on. And if you're planning to set up DR, then you'll have to include that in the window as well. And then have a very meticulous cutover planning and rerun that multiple times with the same set of people who would be doing your production. So at least the previous 2-3 runs, ensure that you have the same set of people. And then to cut down on the time taken for data validation, and depending on the size of your data, try to automate the data validation using tools available, try to run them in parallel, and try to complete that because all that happens during your cutover window. So these are the key learnings that we have taken after running multiple conversions with our customers, and the tools that we used. And so this is pretty much how a S4 conversion happens. So at this point, I'll open up the discussion, open up the forum for discussion. So depending on the questions I receive from customers, you can notice that you're on mute at the moment. So ask your questions at the end. To avoid an overlap of speakers, please click on the raise hand button at the right, and then we will get your questions and be able to answer them. Please go ahead, Mr. Satyanarayan.
Ma'am, I am Satya. This is from Qatar National Cement Company, Doha.
Please go ahead.
First of all, let me thank you very much. I think you have given a wonderful brief about the migration to S4HANA. Quickly, I have one or two questions. I mean, my first question is that based on your experience, is it advisable to migrate directly to S4HANA, or is it better to go for a two-stage migration, that is to get to HANA, okay, where you are getting rid of Oracle database as well as operating system, and then stabilize for a couple of maybe 1 or 2, 3, 4 months, and then migrate to S4HANA?
See, primarily, I would suggest the one-step approach to S4HANA. Reasons being very simple. See, you can finish off the entire change in one window, and the only change I see from doing it in a two-step to the one-step process is anyway the basis team getting adapt to the HANA database will happen. And if you move from non-HANA to HANA first, you still have to adapt your code to work with HANA. And then you do it one more time and make it work with S4HANA. So your timeline of the project will not be, you could accomplish the same thing in a timeline, which will be like, let's assume you move from non-HANA to S4HANA, and then from non-HANA to HANA, and then from HANA to S4HANA. If that's going to take T1 plus T2, what will happen when you do from non-HANA directly to S4 is only T2. It will not be very different. So I suggest that you go ahead and do a one-step migration to keep the project within a shorter time frame and reap the benefits of S4 right away. But
Okay.
you'll have to ensure your basis team gets enabled a little ahead of time, so they're able to take it over from the partner who does this conversion.
Thanks, ma'am. Thank you very much. And another question is, what is the typical timeline that you look for?
Okay, typically for an assessment, I would say anywhere between 5 to 6 weeks. And for a project, for a system, depending on the complexity, size, those are some variations that would increase the timeline, but you should be able to accomplish it in anywhere between 6 to 8 months. But for really big customers, if we are talking about tens of terabytes, then that's a different question. But otherwise, I would say up to 8 months.
So you mean to say minimum 6 to 8 months is the time period?
Yes.
Thanks, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Srirama. Go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Srinivasan.
Sriram, you're not audible. Sriram, there's a lot of noise. If you want to go ahead and type your question, please do. You're not audible. Sriram, there's a lot of disturbance on your audio, so we've muted you again. Please go ahead and type your questions here. Go ahead, Mr. Syed. Mr. Syed? Mr. Syed, we've unmuted you. Please go ahead with your question. Okay, before he gets back to us, I have 3 more questions. One is from Laura, where the question is, how many resources do you need to assign to the project? Is it per SAP module? Yes, primarily the basis part will still be there. Depending on the modules that you have done, you would need people who understand both ECC and S4. So if you have finance, if you have logistics, then you need people on those modules to be able to understand the simplification and also assist in the fit gap analysis, and also to enable your team to understand S4 better. So you will have people in multiple modules. And the next question I see is from Vamsi. What is the significance of custom code check during just DB migration to Suite on HANA? During when you convert from just to Suite on HANA, yes, you just put a check mark on that and make it HANA compatible. But then when you just do that, you're not really using the power of HANA. Your code still runs. It runs faster because you're on HANA, but you're not really using the functionality, the power of HANA. So you will have to look at your SQL code and the order by clause, the ones with the order by clause to ensure that. So it is significant in both cases, but customers who just move to Suite on HANA don't always optimize the code, because as soon as you move to Suite on HANA, you're happy because it runs faster. It does not run faster because you've optimized the code. It just runs faster because you are on HANA. I give you a 512 GB memory, any code would run that's faster. The next question I see is, yes, we will share the slides. What else do we have? Okay, this is Syed from PDO. We have distributed, please show me that question. Yeah, we have a distributed system wherein we have different boxes for HR, BW, SRM, GRC, Solution Manager, and EMS. So what you typically do in this case is, I'm assuming you have a ECC HR, and is it just ECC HR? I think you would have another ECC finance system or something else. So when you do the migration, I would think you would do from your ECC finance system to S4, but you will leave your HR as is for the time being, because we want to understand your roadmap to see if you're going the success factors route. But we will ensure that the integrations are left intact from S4 to your ECC HR system as well. Again, with BW, you would be sending data from your current ECC system to BW for reporting. We will ensure that BW receives data in the same format as it did from ECC. Or during our assessment phase, we will go about and look at your current reporting strategy and see possibly those reports for which you could run those using embedded analytics. So all that will have to be done during the assessment phase. The analysis will have to be done. Having said that, what we propose is always a lift and shift model, where we take your ECC assets, put you on S4HANA, and then leave a 3-month stabilization period, and then we start to really use the new functionality of HANA. Possibly a couple of really required Fiori screens would be activated in this phase, but then post that we will identify what more has to be done and do that in phases. So that is how it's done. The next question from, okay, how to write, this might have to be the last question as we are running short of time. Let me read the rest of the questions. Please feel free to send it to us by email, and we will definitely address that. And we can also have one-on-one calls with each of you if you're interested in getting more information. Let me do one last question. How to retrieve old reports from the earlier data structure if we change the ABAP code to meet HANA requirement? What is the impact of the new data structure to access and authorization controls? Any need to change them? Yes, when you'll have to relook your custom code on where you're getting this data from. CDS is available, so the custom code remediation is done a little simpler, but still you would have to look at your ABAP code and ensure that you're able to extract the same data from the S4 structure. With respect to authorization, yes, there is some level of authorization changes that happen, especially when you start to use Fiori and some transactions go obsolete. So then you would have to ensure that you know where to run these transactions and how you run it, and the authorization object changes. But I would say maybe about not more than 10 to 15% of authorization changes. So at this point, I would like to end the webinar. Thank everyone who attended the webinar, and please feel free to get in touch with us. We can definitely do one-on-one with each of you and be able to address all your questions on a one-on-one session. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.